Hi everybody and welcome to the latest CTO Craft Bytes event. Today we are going to be talking about what leaders can learn from the Montessori method. So if this is your first time at a CTO Craft Bytes, let me tell you a little bit more about the group. CTO Craft is a mentoring and coaching community for technology leaders all over the world, focusing on supporting technologists and their leadership growth. Community members are currently over 7,000 and CTO Craft provides them with one-to-one coaching, mentoring groups and a curated Slack community and events like this one. Big thanks today to the headline partner AWS for helping make these Bytes events possible. I'm Emma Hopkinson-Spark. I am Chief of Staff at a technology consultancy called 101 Ways in London and Amsterdam. And my specialism is coaching, transformation, agile, background in technology. Joining me today is Simone. Do you want to give us a quick intro?
Yes, of course. Hi, everyone. So my name is Simone, and I'm a technology leader with more than 10 years of experience as a leader, and I co-founded two companies, Neutralit and more recently Guider. Then 1 year and a half ago, I moved to Babylon. That's coincided with my daughter being 2 years old. Why this sounds like a bit of random fact, you're going to find out that it's quite relevant for the talk. And I'm now in Babylon. I'm the senior engineering manager for the aftercare trial. On the side, I also help a VC called Tech Shop, and I do advisory for them. And that's me, I guess.
Cool, thank you. For anyone that doesn't know Crowdcast as a platform, it gives you a little tour of the window that you're looking at right now. Over on the right of your screen, you will see a chat window. By all means, say hello, where it says, say something nice down the bottom. So say hello, chat to one another as you go. Along the bottom, you will see one of the links says ask a question. So if there's any questions you want to particularly pose to Simone as we go, drop it in there and I will feed it into our conversation as we go along. So with that, we will get started. We've got about an hour and there's lots to talk about, so I'm going to jump straight in. So the title is What Leaders Can Learn from Montessori Method. So why don't we just start with the basics of what is the Montessori method? So I feel like I know a little bit because I also have a daughter and I was pregnant when I was looking at the pressure of, oh my goodness, what school is she going to go to and everything. And I got quite enamored with the whole Montessori school thing a few years back. So why don't you just explain for people what it really means?
Yeah, absolutely. And Montessori or Maria Montessori was a pioneer to child development in the early 900. What she's normally focused on are kids of until 3 or 4 years old. So it's a very, very old sort of like approach to early development. And the reason why it's still quite popular is that it is very, very updated in terms of like connection with the modern science. And this is amazing. You know, if you think about a method that is 100-year old and is still updated with modern neuroscience, that's quite incredible. Now, obviously, probably if you heard of the Montessori method, you probably heard about nurseries. And you also maybe that it's about like letting people do what they want is very far from the truth. But at the moment, it is used also in secondary, primary school at times, so it's a bit more widespread. But it's mostly like it's a method to help basically children to grow more independent, more comfortable with who they are. I guess that's the short version of the answer.
Okay, so then what parallels are there? How does that translate into a world of work then?
Yeah, let me do a step back. So let me explain how I got where I am with the method. So that was back in Guider. So in Guider a couple of years ago, Guider is a mentoring and coaching platform. So I used to spend an incredible amount of time talking with the organizational psychologists, coaches to understand how to really grow people inside the organization. At the same time, as I mentioned before, my daughter was growing, and so as given I'm a bit of a science geek, I was geeking out into early development science. And it was very, very interesting to see like this very interesting parallel on how you grow people, what people really need, and what child needs. Because that, despite the massive difference in age, actually they're quite similar. And so that was quite appealing to me. And at some point, I got into the Montessori method. And that was because I was following what's called the um, I was following the Montessori principles, and I decided, okay, let's figure out what are the connection with the work. And what attracted my attention was a phrase that the Montessori, Maria Montessori mentioned in one of their book, that is, help me to help myself. That was a very interesting phrase, because there is a help, the first part that is help me. And as a parent, but also as a, as a leader, when you hear someone say help me, you feel like you tend to to give your hand and say, obviously they need me to act on it. But then when you hear the help myself, you do a step back. It's like, okay, this is a bit more complicated. This is not about helping you do the task. This is actually like helping you figure out how to do it yourself. And these like almost clash between these two needs that are so common, both in parenthood and like at work, that really caught my attention. The reason why I was very keen on those principles were because I found that sometimes when we do leadership training, I think we describe things as they are optimal. So it's kind of like, you need to coach and you need to, but it's often the word is imperfect, and nobody knows that better than a parent. It's kind of like, life is messy and you always do a lot of mistakes. And obviously the way for you to do is to grow 1 month at a time and get better. And I think this balance, this feeling that you don't need to do everything right, but there is a balance. Sometimes you do it right, sometimes you do it wrong. I think it was key. And so that was one of the reasons. I remember like I give always an example about that, and it's like, if every time I need to get out of the house, I let my daughter, like put their shoes on, I think I was going to be always late. There is no way around it. It's kind of like, so at times what I need to do is I need to step back. I need to step in, help her out. And so we can, promptly go to wherever we need to go. At times I have a bit more time, so I can step back and can let her learn. And this need to be you need to make a conscious decision almost, because if you were too often, you sort of step in, it means that they're not going to have a chance to grow. If you do the opposite, you always step back, sometimes you're gonna miss, like, I don't know, miss an appointment. And it's very, very similar in tech leadership. At times you need to jump on the problem and you need to act and solve it yourself. There may be like a time criticality, or it may be technically, maybe the right person is too much for them to do it. On the flip side, sometimes if you don't spend enough time stepping back and allowing your people to grow, it's going to be very hard for them to grow. So balancing, being very like understanding of this balance is quite key. And so when I got it there, when I got into this, I started to look at the principle. It was like, if I wanted to explain to someone else, what can I use? And I'm lucky because obviously this is a 100-year-old method. So, and it's a principle method. So I look at the principle. I did a bit of cherry picking, I'll be honest, Emma. So I picked the one that was more relevant to work. And I picked 5. So I picked 5, and 3 of them are more about what you should do, and 2 are more about how you're going to do it. So the one that are about what you should do is independence, and then is intrinsic motivation. That in Montessori is quite specific, and freedom within limits. Instead, in terms of like how to do it, so prepare the environment and mutual respect. I kept the original name of the principle, although like when you translate it in the work environment, they need to be adjusted a bit. But yeah, so this is how I transition to it, I guess.
Okay, and all of those things are really familiar in a work context. Anyway, I think part of me, I don't know, when I first started thinking about this subject, part of me, my immediate go-to was, is it going to come off as a bit patronizing to talk of developers and work environment in the same way that we do kids, like, but actually it's more like the other way around, because what those principles are really founded in is treating our children like we would adults. So it's a little bit chicken and egg, and trying to figure out like where where does it come from? Or are we treating the kids like adults, or are we treating our adults the way that we're going to treat our kids? So that was one of my first go-tos. But everything you just described there in principles is everything that should be familiar to people anyway. I think especially that intrinsic motivation, that's something we talk a lot about, the difference between extrinsic and intrinsic.
Yeah. I mean, on the first point that you made, is my concern as well. Normally, if I do a talk on this, so obviously this is a conversation, but I don't know if I have a disclaimer that is like, and it's exactly what you said. I'm not advocating to treat employee like children. I'm treating my child as an adult. So it's it's the opposite. It really is the opposite. And the reason why it's like that is because really, obviously when I talk about neuroscience, I talk about self-determination theory. And the growth model and so on. Those are things that that are really core to us. They are so core that already exist in a child that is 1 year old, and they stand still, and they're still extremely valid for people that are in their work life. So yeah, this is why I think it's very important. So it's a very, very good point. Thank you for making the point, because I'm always worried that people think what you just described.
It's go-to, isn't it? I know back years ago when I was teaching, when I was coaching teams, particularly, I used to go in with the standing answer of "I'm not your mother." Like the number of teams that come to you and ask you to do things or look for permission for everything all the time, and I would just stand in front of them and say, "I'm not your bloody mother," was my quote for them. And it reminds me a lot of that. The stuff that you're talking about is actually how do you parent well, and how do you bring people along and empower them to make their own decisions and things as well. And when I think of Montessori, certainly at the schools that I was looking at when my daughter was young, I think of it in terms of nice big open space with, okay, we've got drawing over here, and we've got maths over here, and we've got reading over here, and people can effectively self-select how they're focusing on. But the principles that you pulled out there don't really equate to that. I guess it's deeper than just the practicalities of what that looks like and how it's reflected in the environment.
Yeah. So on one end, what you said again, it was great. All the things that I mentioned, it shouldn't be a surprise to anyone. We're even talking about mutual respect. Obviously, like in a work environment, it should be like a given, right? The reason why I brought this principle and the concept is that I think that having a parallel with the child sometimes is a very good, it's a good metaphor. It really makes you feel like more deeply at what we do. That's one hand, and the other hand is, yes, you're right. There is a bit more to that, especially for example, both on the topic of intrinsic motivation, but also on the prepare environment. Those are quite deep topic, and they're very powerful because they actually they tell you exactly what you may have to do to make like an environment that help people be more engaged, but also more effective. And on the other time, how do you actually do that? What does it even mean about it?
So do you think that at that point where you say you became a parent and you started to look more into this, has that changed your leadership style then? Do you think the more you've looked into this, have you acted on that, or is it just more confirmed the way that you were working anyway as a leader?
So normally another thing that I say is that I'm not going to advocate that being a parent will make you a better leader. If you've been a parent, that probably you're going to be a more tired leader for sure. Probably you're going to sleep less and so on, but not necessarily, and probably not likely like a better leader. It obviously the different perspective helped me, but mostly because I was following this sort of like this parallel. I now reflect more. I wasn't joking. I often, when someone comes to me or I see a problem, I really repeat to myself, help me to help myself. Where am I today? Where do I need to draw the line? That is probably the most critical thing that helped me to. It's kind of like, let's make a conscious decision about what's next now in terms of that. For each member that I interact with, let me figure out where they are. Am I helping them enough to help themselves? Am I stepping in too often? I don't know if it's about parenting. It is about this journey that I had while being a parent.
Yeah, but it opens your eyes, I guess, to, like you say, to be more conscious about actually how you're doing that and what you're doing there. Okay, so the principles that you mentioned, why don't we dig into them a little bit more then? So which one do you want to drill into further?
Yeah. So let's start with the what, I guess. I mean, so as I mentioned, there is a bit of a relationship with the self-determination theory, or at least two aspects of self-determination theory. So the first one is obviously independence. Independence is really like what I described before. You know, you shouldn't do something that your child is think he can do himself. So how that translate in the work environment. I mean, to be honest, that's quite easy. It's kind of like you know, if someone want to do a presentation, if someone want to do a report, you know, let them do it. Even sometimes I advocate, you know, delay the feedback. You know, let them do, and if it's not going to be a disaster for his career, even if fail, you know, feedback can wait later. If that affect his confidence. Sometimes we want to build the confidence, especially early leaders. We want to build the confidence first and then trying to improve. So independence is quite key. And often independence is a fight with delivery. So it's kind of like, you know, if you've been like you know, a leader from behind, you know that at times you may need to push a bit more. And sometimes you want instead the team to sort of like find a way to go ahead himself. So finding that right balance of independence is quite key because again, that's the principle. But in actual fact, sometimes you need to get out of the door. You need to lace our shoes. And the work environment that means, you know, maybe that problem needs you to step in. That meeting needs you to get it to the right expected outcome. This is where you decide, you consciously decide, okay, let's pause on that, you know, and I'll step in. But I need to be conscious. So that's the independence meeting, the independence principle.
That sounds as though it's quite a hard balance to strike, isn't it? Because if you offer that independence and you offer that freedom, but then you have to effectively take it back or walk it back or to step in because of other pressures, then that's risky in terms of, I guess, undermining people's faith in that independence or the trust even between you. And how have you found walking that then? Where has that been hard?
Well, you know, obviously for me as well is a work in progress, right? I think ideally you want to be very, you know, you may want to pick your position earlier on. So let's say, you know, being the person that step in the meeting to sort of like when someone else is running it is definitely like an extreme thing to do. It's kind of like it. So either you are, but I've done that, for example. I've wrote an article about it with my experience of exactly for the independence principle. I was in a meeting. One of my leads was was running those type of meetings, and I just like that was very critical because we had to deliver in 2 weeks, and I felt like the conversation wasn't going where it was supposed to be. And I unconsciously just jumped in. I unconsciously jumped in, and I tried to rectify and to write in the right way. You know, I even checked with the person after, and it was like, no, I'm fine. It is really critical because at times people feel like, you know, if you do this double mistake, for example, when you jump in, you kind of need to check in immediately. One is because, you know, they may already have some feelings, but worse, they may not have, but they grow resentment. So it's kind of like, you know, like they don't even realize that actually what happened. It's a bit like you took away something from them. This is what you do. When you do this kind of thing, you took away something from them. Some people realize and say, look, you know, I could have done that without you. And that's great because that means the level of awareness is higher. At times it's not even there. So at times it's you trying to figure out, it was like, no, are you okay? Yeah, I'm okay. And so be explicit, say, you know, what I've done, I'm sorry, I took it away from you, it doesn't happen. But it's a fine line, you're totally right. Either you wanted to do it like, you know, you agree. You know, we normally with my the team, the people that report to me, I'm quite explicit. It's like, I would like you to run this stakeholder. I would like you to do those meetings. You're responsible for. I'll do this one. And then we agreed before, and that's helpful. I'm talking about meeting because like a lot of our life in Zoom is about meetings, but you know, it translates with everything, to be honest.
I guess being explicit is the key, really, because it's setting the right expectations. And if you need to break what you've done in the past, is at least be honest about it and be straight about it, and you can discuss the reasons why it's a different way, or it's you've had to change tack somewhere. Okay. Where to next then? So if that's independence, where next?
Yeah, so the second is intrinsic motivation. And intrinsic motivation now is described in the Montessori method for child is in opposition of something else. And the phrase I love the most is, there are no stars in the Montessori nursery or in the Montessori school. What does it mean? The idea is that learning is its own reward. So learning itself doesn't need star, doesn't need, praise, doesn't need anything like that. And that is a two different level. Obviously, one is extrinsic motivators on one end, and also when there are like praise, to have the praise on, on the outcome and not necessarily on the person. So you're not saying, well done to the person because they are, they are exceptional or something, but on the effort and so on. So there is a bit of a, self-determination. There is a bit like of growth, I guess. And but specifically, as you notice, obviously self-determination is about three elements. This is about mostly competency. So when they describe this motivation, the motivation is about like we want people to, or a child to be really passionate, really motivated by their own learning, by their getting better at what they do. And for a child, everything is a challenge. It's kind of like everything is hard because obviously if you before I wasn't that, I didn't know that child need to learn how to move their hands. For me it was I assumed they would, but when I had a child, I figured out that even for them, like reaching, thinking I want to get that and being able to grab it, it was a challenge. So maybe you think, well, that obviously everything is a challenge, so it's self-motivating. And what about the work environment? So as you know, in the motivation science is quite broad at the moment, and there is a lot of research, for example, on meta motivation. And what I found in meta motivation is that actually we often underestimate how something is intrinsically motivating in the first place. So instead, we're thinking that, I don't know, like especially like for work, like in technology, I think there is hardly anything that is not intrinsically motivating. It's really hardly anything. And so we can describe things that are not motivating by, I don't know, that very repetitive, that there is no autonomy required, that there is nothing that you can improve and so on. I don't think there is any, to be honest. Even if I think to the most boring thing to do, I think that if it's that boring, means that you're doing wrong. So this is why I think that's very important. And obviously, like this intrinsic motivation, for people that know about it, they may have read, I don't know, Drive by Pink. That has a slightly variation of the self-determination theory described, but even that book say, well, obviously in the work environment it's different because you get paid to do your job. That's a big external motivator, isn't it? So that's a bit of a baseline. Like people need to be paid or rewarded in a fair way. What does it mean? It means equally among their colleagues, so fairly. So it's kind of like if you don't pay fairly inside your organization, probably there is a lot of work that you need to do in terms of motivation, and also like a bit of fairness compared to the outside world. Obviously, like not every company can afford the same salary. We all know that, but there need to be the sense that you're not abusing your power and you pay me less than I'm actually worth it. But outside that, intrinsic motivator are very, very important, competency especially. And something that I was reflecting on recently about intrinsic motivator and competency is how much developer experience affect competency. But when we think about competency, we really think about like learning or getting better at something. But it's actually, if you look at the science, it's really like it's expressing, is being able to say, I am competent. It's kind of like I'm getting better. And what does it mean? It means that if you're the tool, the environment that your engineers, for example, let's talk about engineers, are using, it's poor in terms of developer experience, and they really have to fight hard to get things done to really, really affect their motivation. Because the end finish, the day finish, and they feel like I didn't accomplish anything. Why didn't I accomplish what I expected? So it's a critical part when we talk about like competency to think about the very experience and if they can truly express what they're capable of.
That's interesting. So I always think of so if we think of the Dan Pink stuff specifically on intrinsic motivation and that kind of mastery, autonomy, purpose world that we're talking, you think of purpose as in something bigger, you know, something actually what's the mission we're on, how are we making the world a better place, anything like that. And that can be really quite hard sometimes to help developers see the purpose of what they're actually working to. But what you're talking about is purpose still, but at a much more micro level rather than that macro purpose. So it's actually just getting better for the sake of it, or demonstrating that, or being able to make it easier or anything like that. It still taps into that purpose side of it, but at the me and my world rather than the macro, I guess.
So as you know, Ping made some adjustment to the self-determination theory, right? Because self-determination theory say that the needs are three. And actually, for me, fit better the description of the original and more scientific version. Obviously, Ping is you need to describe to the wider audience, so on. So he took some shortcuts. But the three elements are, as we mentioned, independence. And obviously, we mentioned like equal mastery, self-determination, equal competency. And then there is the third one that is, I can't remember. It's not inclusivity. Is I can't remember. If I remember, I'll tell you later. But so it's relatedness.
Right.
So the relatedness is partially feeling of belonging. So there is an element of that. This is why I think where the sort of purpose comes from, the sense of belonging. So it's kind of like you feel what you do is worth it, and your team feel it is worth it, and you are a tribe. The whole tribe concept. At the same time, there is also your relationship, your one-on-one relationship that matter. This is why, like at times, we say like that. People leave their managers. Obviously, it's not always true. But what's true is that if you don't feel like people care about you, if there is not that relatedness, that really affect. Because it's kind of like people, our brain doesn't perceive family and work strictly like at the base level. They're the same. So we want that people care about us. Mm-hmm. And if there is no level of care, I think that's quite important. So purpose build on that. Purpose is about that those people relate to each other toward a certain goal.
That's nice to bring it back to something much more personal as well, and much more human element to it as well, rather than those bigger concepts. We've got a couple of messages coming in the chat. By all means, put your questions in that ask a question as well. It's sometimes easier to pop up. That just looking at the chat one, is it Anila? How can we use the no stars principle with performance to pay that the majority of the companies are still using? So I guess that leads us into that principle around the whole the no stars, and we don't like the hero coders or however else we term it. Let's lead into that one a little bit as well. Then how does that relate?
It is hard because she's right. Most companies do, and the reason why they do it first. There is no way that in any setup you can just do intrinsic motivation. So it's well known. So I work in health. I work for Babel, work in health. So we really know our motivation science very well. And we say, we shouldn't give candy to people to do their blood test or something like that. So the rewards are a very, very specific reason to be, and need to be framed in an overall vision for motivation. So one thing is that, well, at times you may need to motivate extrinsically people. And this is going to open a wider discussion. It is also extrinsic motivator is a continuum. So it's not just intrinsic, extrinsic, but there is like a number of things that you can do. Some that are more intrinsic and something that are more extrinsic. So that's as an umbrella. But talk about performance based. So this is what I normally suggest. So this is why I see about it. You can't, obviously if you're in a small company, you're part of the board and you have influence over it. Maybe there is something that you can do. It's kind of like for example, I don't massively like to connect, and this is gonna start a massive discussion, so I'm aware of it. But I don't massively like to connect the personal performance to a monetary reward. So I would rather people sort of like get rewarded for the company is doing well. So if you have stock options, or if you have shares, if you are public, it's sort of like everybody got it if the company is going. That is relatively easy if the company is small, because it's it's easier impact. What people do and the company do, there is a stronger connection. When the company grows, the concern is that, well, how do we know if people are actually doing their job? And again, this is a controlling behavior, right? So it's kind of like we're trying to control things. And so it depends how we go there. So what I normally say is that if you are in a company that do performance-based pay, Babylon does. So I'm not saying like you poor people do that, or we are pure, nothing like that. Life and work is complicated. There are a lot of things going on. So I normally try to separate them as much as possible, personal development from the performance part. So I don't talk at all about personal development. When I talk about performance, I have different conversation. I measure in a different way. I clarify that it's about them, it's not about me. They really feel like we're talking about two different things, although they are related. Before I start having performance-based pay, I used to have, if I evaluate someone, to tell them at the end of the year as a feedback, I would use performance and personal development at the same time, because are you growing, and what you do is still you. But obviously, if one is related to getting paid a certain bonus, a certain number of shares, you want to separate them, because you don't want that people, like they go through and say, I used to be very passionate about learning new technology. Now I do it because I have it in my personal development plan. So it's kind of like the problem with the extrinsic motivator is that it addicts you to be paid for doing something. There is a million research on it. There is even a meta-analysis on how much extrinsic motivator sort of like affect motivation in general in the long term. So it works on the short term. So at time you need to do it. If there is like you're struggling to keep people, I'm not gonna say that, but maybe you do it if there is nothing else you can do better. But in the long term, I think it's important that you separate these two aspects. So personal development and peer review. But it's hard. I mean, you need to navigate those things and depend on your company.
I've always felt really strongly that they're separate conversations. I think because you approach it with a different mindset, right? If you're going into a pay conversation, then people are, I don't know, you're almost in a prove my case or a defensive frame of mind, or it's how do I justify asking for a rise, or it's a different mindset than approaching personal development for the growth's sake and for genuine feedback and improvement, and for people to feel like they're getting something out of it. I think it's a different, you approach those conversations with a different emotional state and a different mindset as you go into them, so you get different results. And if you muddy the waters, then I don't think you do either very well, actually. Probably.
Yeah, no, that's very fair. That's fair.
So which principle should we jump into next then?
I think I would go for freedom within limits. Again, like when I didn't know anything about Montessori, I thought that, it's basically like people running around like crazy and do whatever they want and throwing, glasses on the floor and stuff like that. When I went to see my daughter the first time, I got shocked. It looked like a military like training.
Wow.
I'm half joking. The thing is, the third principle is freedom within limits. So what does it mean? It means that we need to be careful how we phrase that, because then people are more controlling and say, I knew it. So it means that child or adults need to be given, obviously, options and in their choice. But at times there are limits, and the limits normally for a child is that it doesn't have to affect his own health, someone else's health, or property, or offend someone, and so on. So these are, like I give a lot of freedom to my daughter, but I kind of like, I don't want her to jump out of the window. So, like obviously when we touch base on environment, I'm going to tell you what I do about the window stuff. But the trick is that for the child is that we want them to protect themselves, right? We don't want to do something that may affect them, especially if they're very dangerous. If you know the term childproofing, Montessori is not about childproofing. So actually, our home never been childproof. It's about like, thinking about the thing that really can hurt them, so not like bumping his head on the table, but more like, again, jumping out of the window. So what does it mean in the work environment? Because you say, what are you talking about? In the work environment means that we, or in a society, everything has limits, even our autonomy. We talk a lot about autonomy, right? And especially if you have an agile sort of mindset or a background, autonomy is key. In every organization, at some point, you are going to have a boundary. There's the boundary that around you can make choices. So what it means define that environment very, very clearly. For the work environment means, again, back to be explicit. Be explicit of where our boundary of choice lies and what kind of thing we can choose, what can we not. It does help because people, at least, when they make choices, they know what's out, what's in, and so it's quite key to be very explicit about where the boundary lie, and obviously at the same time, protecting each other if there is a fight. But that's something that never happened to me, so I'm not going to touch base on it.
Not for years. Haven't seen that for years. No. So
last week.
So on that though, as far as like the boundaries, I guess it's another balance though, isn't it? And that fine line to walk, because I guess I imagine a scenario, maybe I've just seen scarier places, where it's the choice is almost artificial, that you're allowed to work on, absolutely, you're free to work however you want, but as long as it's within these guardrails that position them really within, you've got to work on this and we've got to have this done by the end of the week, and you can only use this way, and you must code in this way, and you must comment in this way, and you must, how do you see that as far as what's acceptable in terms of those boundaries then, and when does it become so constricting that it's not really then freedom?
So obviously, if you're running, even if you're running like a technology organization, so you have boundaries, right? You report to the board. If you report to the board, obviously, you have other sort of stakeholders or other chief that you need to make things going on. So it's not, this doesn't really impact just the engineering team and so on. This impacts everyone. Right? Mm-hmm. When you're looking at the boundary for choices, I think it's a systemic decision. So you really I really can't stress enough the importance of looking at the 3 intrinsic motivators in your organization and trying to find the right balance. Because really it's about at times it may be okay. For example, if you have more strict boundary technically, for example, the team, imagine if the team has, it's a pure product company where actually the team is really making product decision. It's not like this is what you need to build, but it's this is the key area that we need to move. That means that on one end, so it's kind of maybe they have so much independence on one side and the other side is fine. So it is a balance act. So, and obviously we just talk about independence, but again, competency, how are they growing? Do we give them the tool to grow? They are enjoying how much relatedness. So there is a bit of feedback that you need to get from the team, and if you just sense the, on the ground to understand how things are going. Also, really have a map of what you're taking away and what's there, and play with it. It's kind of when things start to get a bit more tight, and you still get a signal that thing. Normally signal are people that are living. It's a very I strongly believe, I really strongly believe that people live because intrinsic motivation are not strong enough in the organization. I don't really buy there are crazy offer in the market. I think I'll be honest with that, but happy to be to someone say the opposite.
Yeah, I think people probably have left for nothing more than a crazy offer, but the chances are within a few months they'll probably want to go again if it's not. It's got to be more than that for people to want to stay, hasn't it? I guess I'm thinking in terms of those boundaries. If I think back to the kids and my daughter particularly, I guess freedom could be, hey, you can do any subject you want to, in which case you would spend her whole time drawing and never do anything else. But it could be you've got total freedom to choose. Do you want to do geometry or algebra? The choice isn't then much of a choice. Have you seen issues where I like the idea of linking it to competency as well, because people have to be able to make good decisions, and decisions about stuff that they are competent in making decisions about, and to have that freedom, and for it to go hand in hand with that. Have you seen it? Where have you seen it work well, or where have you seen it be a problem?
This is also connected to another principle, that is the mutual respect. So let me just briefly mention it. Also, although if we'll talk later, but I think it's useful. Although mutual respect, like at work level, like that should be a given. You need to be a good human being. That's done. That's principle. But from a Montessori point of view, that doesn't mean just like being a good human being. Like not don't treat people like you did on the surface and so on. But it's also a respect that people are different. Respect that different people come from a different journey. They learn at different pace. They are a different moment in their career and their life and so on. Why is that related to what you described? The reason is because where I see not working is where people are expected to do things the same way. So when I see it not working is where you expect, I don't know, for example, that everybody is able to figure out what's next for them or what they need to work on. The other place where I see it not working very well is when people think about independence disconnected from competency. This is super common in agile environment where things like, oh, you're going to be self-organizing, and people quit.
Yeah.
Why? Well, because people want to feel like they're competent. And if you give them, just the white canvas and not the right structure to help them, and then like they don't feel competent. They feel like this is not working. Obviously, this is not working, and obviously I'm wasting time. Where is my flywheels? Where is my support network? Where is I don't know what to do. People don't know what to do. They get meeting. They look at each other like, what do we do? So there are these are where things are not. I think that don't work well. Where they do work well, they work well where people understand that people are on a journey. Journey for a child means that a child, you don't say, hey, these are 10 types of fruits. Which one you want to pick? It's like, whoa. You say, this apple, this is a pear. Which one do you want? You go for a simple choice. So it's similar. Like for teams and for individuals, it's very, very important to be incremental, know where they are, where they are, and build something, create something that works for them. So for the individual, if you're a line manager, it means that you really need to, the first thing you need to assess is how much awareness they have into their career, how much awareness they have into what they need to work on. Because if it's not there, you can't say, yeah, pick what you want to learn. Like, yeah, good luck. For the team, it means that you can't say, I don't know, everybody's going to use Scrum and is going to have this process and then now you go. But on the opposite is not even say everybody can choose their framework and everything and you have a web canvas. You need scaffolding. So for teams, they need scaffolding. They need a structure that is kind of okay, is quite light, and it helps them move and it helps them, go through releases and deploy to prod and be happy. And then like maybe they remove a piece of scaffolding and they add something else, or that they change it, but they need a certain, and that helps. That really helps.
Right. So we've got about 15-20 minutes left. Plenty of time if anybody else has more questions you want to pop into the chat and things. Where do you want to go then next? What principle should we dig into next?
I think probably is prepared environment. So prepared environment is for me is the it's probably like one of the most important things you can learn today. Although we talk a lot about environment in our industry, don't we? So it's not going to come as a surprise. So what's the prepared environment for someone that hasn't worked in hasn't seen a Montessori school or doesn't know the method? What it means that before Montessori, child didn't really have things that fit for them. Now you go to school, there are tables that are right for their height, and they can be independent because actually everything around them is allow them to do it. But we're not just talking about sitting. We're also talking that they can go to the fridge and take the milk like my daughter did yesterday, and they pour it and get the glass that is made of glass, not plastic. and they do everything independently. It's like a little house for them. What that enable? That enable what I just described. Enabled independence and mastery. They get better at it. They get better at it, and they are more motivated to do more. So, and at the same time, it's useful for the environment, because the environment also, if you can make it that already define those limits, then is already explicit. So if you can make an environment that explicit what are the limits of your choice, then there are no wrong choice to make. If there is something, I'll tell you this story. So my mom has a beautiful house, and obviously, like, she has a lot of shiny things that we don't want to be trapped and so on. And when my daughter was 1, so we spent like a few weeks from her, and she would spend all the time saying, "No, no, don't touch it, no, no." And that reminded me of some companies where people kept making the wrong choices, and I was like, "No, you can't do that, you can't do that, you can't do that." And I'm thinking, if that wasn't more explicit, so if that choice wasn't even there, you don't have to have this conversation. And saying a lot of no doesn't help you understand what it should be the yes. So being able to explicit your constraints is very useful. Let's translate it in the work environment before someone fall asleep. So in the work environment, there is a lot. We already talked, obviously everybody now talk about team topology. So it's about organizational structure. How does the organizational structure of our teams enable certain behavior? How does it enable independence? How does it enable like mastery and so on? How we reward people is part of the environment. Obviously, we mentioned, like how we pay, but even promotion. This is part of the environment. The culture, like who you're promoting is the culture is a key part of the environment. What kind of behavior we are supporting, what kind of behavior we don't support. This is really give a strong signal. If you're promoting someone for a specific reason, for certain behavior, you need to stress it out. You need to say it aloud. This person is getting promoted, and I really appreciate X, Y, and Z. This is a clear signal, and it's part of the environment. And obviously, environment is tooling. It's kind of like what back in the day we were in the office was the dashboard, the visibility of the information. How can we make things that people know that they matter? If you are migrating from A to B, you may want like a nice dashboard that shows actual progress. And actually, talking about, this is going to open a parenthesis, but I think it's going to be useful because you talk about when extrinsic motivators are actually useful. Extrinsic motivators are useful for a short amount of time for a very specific task. So, for example, once we had to migrate all our tests, it was back in, I don't know, 10 years ago, all our tests from, I don't know, like something like JUnit to something that we used to write in Groovy, like I think it was Jab or some sort of like testing framework for Groovy. And so it was a very limited task. It was limited in time. So we put like a board, in our office where we would write how many tasks were left. And every time someone was making a commit that would have migrated some tests, it would go on the board, that would delete the number and put the new number. That was the idea of one of our engineers. That was a perfect extrinsic motivator. It was short in time. Obviously, the work was that it was also a more intrinsic motivator because it was about identity. So it wasn't about extrinsic and so on. But it was perfect because it's kind of like people, feel like they got it. That was clear. There was a reward, like a little thing. I'm there to remove it. And it worked quite well. So that is environment. That is environment as well.
Okay. Yeah, thinking of all the times I've gained the system of like reducing bug counts and making it very visible, and getting people to almost get competitive about it. Like you say, it only works for a short time, and then people just get used to it, and it focuses your attention on one thing, but it's not sustainable, is it? It's not gonna last. It's not gonna build in.
It just also may cause wrong behaviors, isn't it?
Yeah, they'll find another way. Yeah.
Okay.
So what was left? Is that all we've gone?
Yeah. Obviously, as I mentioned, motor respect. I mentioned before. So it's like being very conscious about the fact that people really, when you're trying to build on those principles, make sure that you do it by considering that people really grow at different rates. That really they're on a different stage of their life and so on. as I mentioned, there is also like I really hope something I don't need to say, that it really need to be a nice human being, like, don't single out people in meetings. Should be a given. Like, you really like nice human being is a prerequisite, but on top of that, really appreciate that people, really learn and grow and work at uh, different speed and different needs. And now that we talk a lot about neurodiversity, this is even more important, like in a time where everybody's in Zoom or expecting people to speak up. Maybe not everyone want to or feel like, and there is a bit of push. Everybody need to be a bit uncomfortable, but just like you can't like build all your organization on this preconception that everyone acts in a certain way, because if not, you left out a big part of the organization, and that's as much about inclusivity than anything else.
On that, and we were just talking before we started about the difference in remote and whether you're in person and in the office, and you just touched then on maybe different way that you might approach meetings, or that looking out for those clues in communication when you're on Zoom as opposed to in a meeting room. Has the last couple of years changed your view on any of the principles and how they apply to the workplace? Is it different? Are you finding it remote than you would do in person?
No, this is a great question. Those principles are very high level, so they, in their definition, I don't think that they change much. Obviously, the way you, as always with principle, right? As always, when you define the way you achieve the principle change. As I mentioned, the environment has changed so much. Like what before was like an information radiator that you can have like all around your office. Now, where is it? How do you define information radiator right now? Do you ship like a TV to every engineer? Do you have a different way to communicate? Do you have more Slack alerts and stuff? Things have changed. The way in which we influence what we do, it's harder. People, because are a lot more on Slack, and even when you do whole hands, there are people that may listen or people that don't listen. It's harder to figure out how often people really like when you do alignment meetings, and those are environment. How many are listening? How many are having a nap? Or I don't know, like they're so focused on work that they're kind of like they start working while someone else is talking. So I think I really love that the society has become a bit more open to people that can move to big city to work, for example, or people that cannot, or people that have like a more complex life that just like be in the office every day at 9. Obviously at 9 I am at the nursery with my daughter, so thank you very much. So this is important. So the fact that we are remote is very important, but it's harder. It's a bit harder to, or we need to find better way to work on this environment, because some of the things that we've done so far, I think they're working less well, and people are also more detached. They're less connected. That's why, for me, going back to relatedness, it's very hard to build relatedness if you're always remote. So it's why, my team has complete choice of when they want to come in the office or when they want to go stay at home. So we don't force anything. It's not like once a day or once a week, once a week or once every. And different teams that are like normally like maybe once a week or once every 2 weeks and so on. And that's important because again, it's independent choice. But they wanted to see each other. But we're also lucky that we are relatively close. The one of the persons that is further away is a couple of hours from London. So that builds a much stronger relatedness. You feel like you are there together more than, we spend a lot of time like on Zoom all together fixing a problem, but it's not the same thing. So work on relatedness, work on environment. I think I still believe that it requires like a personal presence, and but at the same time, the tool that we're using for remote still need to work on how we make the environment a bit more explicit. How we do it in a way that's going to include everyone, because I feel like now we're getting out, so things are going to start to be normal, and it's going to be easier to understand which part of our organization, has been left behind, which part of the organization wasn't really getting the messages because the media that we were using wasn't getting there. So yeah, it's going to be a challenge, I think.
I guess I figured that it probably made those principles more important than ever. The example you gave about an information radiator, for example, it's very easy to put images all around the office, and they say it's put dashboards up, and to have that there and kind of forget why it's there, that it just becomes part of the environment and part of the background and just part of being there. Whereas, okay, you've then no one can go into the office, so you need to replace the information radiator, so you'll replicate exactly the same dashboard up on a Trello somewhere or whatever. And is it actually serving the purpose that you've got? Is the why still being served? So if you're remembering why it's important and that what you're trying to tap into, then those principles probably come more important. It's going to be an interesting time, like you say, as it changes again, and make sure you don't lose some of that focus on why as well.
Yeah.
So we've only got about 5 minutes left. Any last questions? Do jump in. I have to ask before we do all the wrap ups and things. How is your daughter then? How is she? Tell me all about how awesome she's doing in nursery at Montessori.
No, so she's doing great. It's very, very different. As I said, I don't want, as parenting style are a very polarizing topic. So this definitely, when I talk about the topic, I tend to say like, look, this is not for me to tell you how you should raise your daughter, or you're not raising the right time in the right way. This is definitely not the topic. I'm using those methods for work. But no, she's doing great. It's very different. So it's very different, but also you can only see how she's doing if you have like 2 siblings and you send one to Montessori school and one to another school. Like gene are so important. Yeah. It's very difficult to do it like in a research, like in a proper, like a scientific way. She's totally enjoying, and it's very good to see her growing very well. Thank you for asking.
Excellent. Okay, any final thoughts, a bit sort of advice that you want to give people then? How would you wrap up your thoughts on it?
Yeah, so I think if you get out with just 2 ideas, these are: when you spot a problem, or when someone comes to you for help, think, help me to help myself. I think this has been helpful to me so much. When you think about how you want to solve those problems, really think about the environment. Telling people what to do. I tell you, my daughter, I ask her what to do a lot. I tell her what to do, it doesn't work. But even with the thought, it's what can we do to change the environment to sort of like make it, more to allow the right behavior to emerge. So the environment is as important as, providing the framework of independence.
I have just posted over into the chat a few links. That's Simone and mine both are LinkedIn profiles, and also a few links and suggestions that Simone thought you might find interesting. There's a link to his blog and a reminder of that Dan Pink book drive. There's also a couple of really good TED Talks that he did on that from a few years back as well. And then if anybody else is interested in Montessori teaching for the children as well, then that's there too. Thank you ever so much. It's been a fantastic hour, really interested. And next time I'm in London, which thankfully isn't very often these days, I might just give you a shout and we can carry on the conversation, because I'd love to hear more about it too. Yeah. For everybody's benefit, just to let you know, I think I'm hosting you again next Friday on a subject around growing a culture of empowerment. So I'd love to see you all there again. Simone, thank you very much, and everyone for joining. Thanks for your questions, and I will catch you all soon. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you, everyone. Bye.